We just saw how you can use a PHP SDK function to retrieve a valid access token for use in Graph API calls. As you would expect, the JavaScript SDK also provides a method to retrieve the access token. It does in fact present us with 3 ways in which to acquire the currently valid access token. In this example, we're going to see how to acquire the access token in JavaScript using all 3 methods. We'll start off with the index_js PHP we saved at the end of the last JavaScript example, or you can copy the index_js_extended_perms.php file from the project files to use as your starting point for this example. The first thing we're going to do is to add 2 extra buttons to the app. This will allow us to show the different approaches, and we'll add a div in which we'll output the access token. So if we go down to the end of the file, add a button to trigger the getAuthResponse method, which we'll be writing in a moment, label it getSession, and we'll add another button to trigger the getStatus function, which we'll also add in a few moments. The div with an ID of access token will be used to show the access token once it's been retrieved. One nice thing about the JavaScript SDK is that it actually provides us with the access token as soon as we have a response from the user login. We can display this simply by accessing it from the response object and outputting it. If we move then up to the response from our FB login, we can then simply capture the access token from the authResponse object within the response object, and we can assign it to the access token div for display. Another option available to us for retrieving the access token is the getLoginStatus function of the JavaScript SDK. Let's go down and add our getStatus method to be triggered when we click the getLoginStatus button. And in the getStatus method, we will use the fb.getLoginStatus function of the JavaScript SDK, retrieve its response. Assuming we have an auth response, we will then retrieve the access token from within the auth response object within the response object. We will alert it and we will pass it out into the access token div for display. The getLoginStatus function, as you can imagine, actually tells us if the user is logged onto Facebook and connected to our app or not. Response.status, as you can see here, will be connected provided the user has logged on to Facebook and has approved our app. The response.authResponse object contains a response to the OAuth 2 authorization process, including the access token. If we aren't concerned about retrieving the login status of the user, we can use another function of the JavaScript SDK. This third function for retrieving the access token is what's called a synchronous accessor, meaning that it simply returns a value which may be assigned to a variable. Let's go and add our third function, getAuthResponse, which will be triggered by the getSession button. GetAuthResponse then uses the fb.getAuthResponse method of the JavaScript SDK to return the authResponse object, from which we can retrieve the access token and, as before, alert it, assign it to the access token div and display it. Okay, so let's save that. Let's swap back to Facebook. Let's run the app. And you'll see our 3 buttons, our current message, no access token present. And now, this time, instead of clicking the login button to prompt the login process, let's click Get Login Status. And you'll see we have an access token. Login status is connected. We have a valid access token, which means we have a valid session with this application. Similarly, if we click Get Session, we have an access token, and we can see the access token from getAuthResponse. It's the same access token. What this shows us is that there may not be a need to prompt the user to log into Facebook, because we may still have a current session for this application. Both of these functions have their uses in ensuring that the user is still connected to your application with a valid session, and you can check the user's login status before forcing the login dialog to pop up and provide a smoother and less obtrusive user experience should they still be connected to your app with a current session. The approach taken by the PHP SDK in this respect is less obtrusive because the user will not be redirected to a login prompt if the initial call to the SDK getUser function detects a valid session and access token. This is another difference between the two SDKs. However, by using the getLoginStatus function, you can provide similar logic within your JavaScript SDK applications and provide a similar experience. There are cases where an access token or a session may no longer be valid. It may have expired, or for other reasons may no longer be valid for your application. In these cases, you'll need to prompt the user to log into the app again, and you'll need to retrieve a new access token. In the next short section, I'll talk through the cases where a session and hence an access token may expire, and what you should do to deal with it. For now, that rounds up our JavaScript example, and you now know how you can retrieve the currently valid access token using any one of three methods within the JavaScript SDK, and also the user's login status.